Today we're talking about the Chrome family tattoo design. Welcome back. You may have seen this tattoo in the Understanding Lettering video, but now we get to go into a lot more detail and break down all the tricks and techniques that help make this one design possible. So make sure to hit the subscribe button and let's get started. Our client would like the word family across their back in a Blackletter style font, and they would like to have the letters shaded in black and gray to look like Chrome. To get a feel for that, I inverted my thumbnail sketch so the letters are light and the background is dark. Before any design, we create a bunch of quick thumbnails, either on paper or on the tablet. And these are surprisingly helpful during the design process, and they take almost no time to create. As usual, our client has provided a bunch of reference images to help describe what they're looking for, so we'll keep these here and use them for inspiration. Here, we're looking at font websites and checking out Blackletter style fonts, and changing the preview text to say the word family. I copy and paste the fonts that I like directly into our project, and we stack them up next to each other so we can compare them more easily. And there's a lot to choose from, but as usual, I'll be picking and choosing my favorite parts from these different fonts and using them to create something new. For this tattoo, I'm looking for a capital letter that I like, and then a lowercase font that pairs well with it. I then merge these together to form a cohesive word. Now it sounds simple, but you have to be careful to make it look natural. We also need to adjust the thickness of the letters so they match. And the key to finding the best combination is having all your options in front of you in the same workspace. I always try to keep all of my research and artwork in one big open project file, so I can reference things without digging through folders or saved images. And after repainting the font to make sure all the letters match, I add a flourish to the center of each letter for extra detail, and I use the liquify tool to reshape a few areas. This leaves us with lettering that has correct spacing but also has its own character. And now it's time to add a curve to our letters. To do that, we begin by creating some guidelines based on the angle of the outer lines of the client's back. The first step is changing the perspective of the lettering to match those lines. Then I add a series of guidelines to the letters and use the skew tool to get both the lettering and the guides into our first position. Next, I create a new set of curved guidelines that we'll use to help skew and reshape the letters into that curved shape. Next, we use our technique where we make a selection starting near the center and then moving towards one end, and use the skew tool to make small adjustments to the curve as we go. We're simply matching the letters to the curved guidelines that we added earlier, and with a bit of practice, this becomes a great way to curve your lettering. And you can do this in Photoshop or Procreate or pretty much any design software. And notice how this method keeps the perspective that we added before curving the letters. It's a really powerful technique, and we use it all the time. Once I get that basic curve, I take some time to change a few of the angles, and then use Liquify to soften some of the sharper parts of the curve just to make everything look a little smoother. And here's a quick before and after. Now it's time to design the flourishes. This first pass is very rough just to get things started. The curve in our lettering makes it possible to mirror the top flourishes on the bottom, which gives the piece a more balanced composition. And after a little reshaping, we've got a solid starting point for our next pass. In this stage, I'm just overpainting the flourishes and making some decisions about where the lines will go, and adding a bit of calligraphy to those curves as well. Now, these lines are still pretty rough, and you've probably noticed by now that I prefer to layer rough passes over each other until I reach the drawing phase, and then I usually make my final choices on paper. To get this image ready for drawing, I first merge the black lettering on a white background. I then use the invert command to create a negative version of the lettering, change the layer to multiply, lower the opacity bit, and erase part of the outside shape. Next, I use a Photoshop technique to generate a usable outline that I can then print onto paper. And with this version, the lines are still really rough and will need a lot of cleanup. But honestly, I'm just eager to get off the computer and start drawing. So I create a new project the size of a sheet of paper, and I paste in the outline. And once that is resized, I lower the opacity down to about 10% and print out a copy. This technique is called overdrawing, and you may have seen me use it before. It's really good for capturing our digital composition and then making our final choices on paper. And we're going to need to make a lot of choices here because the lines that we got from our digital composition are pretty rough. So I'm rebuilding them by drawing very lightly with my hardest pencil, and I'm making a lot of choices at this stage. I'm also using a technique called pass-through lines. These are overlapping lines that pass through each other, and that will keep some of our edges a little tighter in the final drawing. And to match some of the sharp details in the lettering, we're adding some sharp areas to the flourishes as well. And after some time, we're starting to get a much cleaner outline. Now we add another layer of detail by creating a 3D effect on both the lettering and the flourishes. First, I choose a vanishing point at the bottom center of the image and draw some guidelines leading to that point. We'll be using these guys to help build out that third dimension. And I'm just taking my time here, making sure that all the angles look correct. And now I'm going over the first section with my softest and darkest pencil, doing a final outline and filling in some of those shapes. And I'm also shading in the background as well as the centers of the lettering. Then I use a thin polymer eraser to clean up some of the negative space. And finally, I go in with a mechanical pencil to add definition to the shading, which is a very critical step. One thing to note is I have to complete each section as I go, starting from the upper left and then working down to the lower right. Since I'm right-handed, if I go and rest my hand on a section that I've already shaded, I'm gonna smudge the graphite and make a huge mess. But it's interesting that when you're tattooing, it's important to not rub off your stencil, so you actually want your hand to rest on areas that you've already tattooed. So in that sense, it's sort of the opposite to drawing. In this drawing though, I'm not too worried about smudging the first outline, because that was done with my hardest lead pencil. What you really need to watch out for is the softest, darkest graphite on the paper. That stuff smudges like crazy. And you might notice that I'm shading the entire middle of each letter. And even though the letters will eventually be chrome, I'm not adding the horizon line or the highlights just yet. I decided to leave that for last, since it felt quicker to do it this way, and it gave me the chance to later decide on the horizon line based on how the shading was turning out. Something I noticed during this stage of the drawing was that things were starting to look a bit flat. It's starting to look like the background behind the letters needs to be darker to give the piece more depth. I ended up adding that extra shading on the computer, so more on that later. The most important tools I used for this stage of the artwork were the thin polymer eraser, which helps keep the negative space clean and consistent, and the mechanical pencil, which added so much clarity to the image. And if you don't have one of these erasers yet, definitely try one out. I'm now adding the horizon line for the chrome effect, and the key here is to make sure that the dark band lands on a good place for each letter. Here I'm layering the shading to get it nice and dark and then carving out those big highlights just above the horizon line. And I'm also adding these smaller highlights as well, and then using the mechanical pencil to sharpen up those highlights and define the edges of the shading. About 95% of my artwork is made using just 4 tools: a hard pencil, a soft pencil, a mechanical pencil, and an eraser. Sometimes I use pen and ink, and this design would have looked great in ink. But for me, pencils are a bit faster and give me the most flexibility when I'm creating my artwork. And after a few finishing details, we have our completed artwork. To get this back in the computer, I scan it at 600 dpi and change the layer mode to multiply so we can see it over our blank template. I remembered that the shading was looking a bit flat, so I started painting in a black background layer and then lower the opacity of that until the contrast feels just right. To get our final shape, I add a few guidelines, and you can see that we need to lift the upper right side of the artwork, so I quickly use Liquify to make that adjustment. I also use the center guideline to clean up our horizon line to finish things off. And here's the completed artwork, along with a full presentation to show our client during the next consultation. And that is the first draft of the Chrome family tattoo design. Hey, if you got anything out of this, then help us out by hitting the like button. And subscribe to our channel, we come out with new videos often. And make sure to hit the bell icon so you don't miss out. And if you're serious about creating the best art possible for your tattoos, then go to tattoodesignschool.com and check out the masterclass. This is everything I wish I knew when I was first starting out, and it will push you to create artwork you didn't think was possible. This is the perfect investment in your tattoo career, so check out the masterclass at tattoodesignschool.com. But most importantly, share this video with the person you know who's interested in artwork and tattoos. And we'll see you in the next one.